Welcome to this OrthoVista video in combination with US Master. There was a previous video, and this video is just to add one other functionality that was not mentioned in the video, which is the Radiometrix, which is an important part. So that means when you have flown in US Master 2 or 3 or more projects, and you generated orthophotos for the first and the second and the third project, and then you merge them together. Perhaps the flights came from different days, different illumination, and they have a difference between each other, and you want then to make the orthophotos still look homogeneous to each other, that they look nice. Then you can use the Radiometrix tool, which is part of OrthoVista. And you can find the Radiometrix tool here in Tools. And then there's here the Radiometrix color editor. And the part here is that we have at the beginning no image selection. And I will just show how to select, how to do editings, and how this has an effect later on our processing. So let's start with selection. Selection in general is done here through this mode. You have to have select active. And when you do this, then your mouse cursor becomes a selector. It means you can drag a box, everything inside a box that touches a footprint of our orthophoto will be selected. And of course, when you unselect and you select the selected images, they will get deselected. You can also unselect all of them. And therefore, that's how you can then graphically select the information or the orthophotos. Another way to select photos is through your project dialog. You can here select images through a list. I can say I want to select here these first 4 images, and then I can here check this box and say add the selected images to the Radiometrix selection. I click it, and then I select through the list these points, and of course these orthophotos, and of course I can also just deselect a single one here, or if I select all 4 again and I deselect, then they are deselected. So you can either through the list or through a graphical way select your photos. When you select something, then it will also be listed here. That means when I go here graphically again and I select here these images, because I'm here in select mode again, and I go here to the table, then we see here in Radiometrix selection, we have here these yes and no's, and therefore you can here of course list them, and then in case you have selected a couple here, a couple there, then you can here still sort the list, the column, and say, okay, I want here these images again to be deselected. Okay, so this is the important part about selection. After you make a selection, we want now to show how you can now make corrections. And the corrections are either done automatically. These are these 2 tabs here where you have a wheel. And you can also manually change with a curve these things. This is the tool with the hands. So the first 4, we skip the first one, which is a macro, which we will not cover here. But this is automatic gradation correction, manually gradation correction, automatic intensity correction, and manual intensity correction. These corrections can be done either on each channel individually, so red for itself, green for itself, blue for itself. This would be individual adjustment of each channel. Or we say, in general, we will here correct in the same way RGB, so that we don't get a color miscorrection. If your images have extreme greenish coloring, then of course individual adjustment would make sense, because we then need to correct green stronger than red and blue. Therefore, this is where you would switch to the individual one when you have a miscolorization of your orthophotos. It's not about intensity or in general color difference. That means if you fly on 2 different days, they are not wrong in color. It's just that the color histogram in general is shifted, or in this case compressed or expanded, But in general, typically when your images are looking normal, then you have a common adjustment that you need to do. Okay, so next one is the correction itself. Okay, if you don't select anything, nothing gets corrected. You can choose whatever you want. I can choose to make my correction based on all images or on selected images or whatever. Well, selected, then you have something selected, but individual or on all. This will not make any corrections. Also, this one here, you need to do a selection, and therefore the reason what you select is that you find a block of images that is in itself extremely more different than the other ones. And this would be typically your first day of flight and your second day of flight. Because typically on 2 different days you have 2 different illuminations, shadows, haze, all these illumination and also perhaps vegetation. You flew 5 days later or 10 days later, then the vegetation is growing or something. In this case here, through rain or through sun, has changed its colors in itself. So therefore, typically this would be then your correction, your selection, and that's what you do. You would then select, okay, I have flown here, this one strip here was flown on a different day than all the others. So let's take the first 2, so we have a little bit more images. So let's assume these 2 flights were strips were flown on a different day than the other ones. Then we want to do here a correction. So in here we also come. Typically you have 2, or let's start with 2. We have 2 different sets of image blocks, and then you have to choose which one you want to correct and which one you want to keep. Yeah, because sometimes perhaps one was flown on a perfect day for flight, cloudy sky, no sunspots, equally homogenized illumination of all your images, and the other one was flown in full sun early at 10 o'clock where you have long shadows. So then typically you want to bring the other image towards the perfect one. And perfect would mean, in our case, I would say 2 criteria help you for this. And one that would be is the histogram. And to see a histogram, you can go into an image, keep the right mouse button longer hold, right here, and then you get a window, and then I can say I want to see the histogram for this orthophoto. And then the histogram shows us how the pixels in this image are distributed from dark to bright. So in our case here, left side is dark, right side is bright, and therefore there's some space available. We didn't use the full dynamic range of our orthophoto for this. And then you would, for the second block, take also a histogram. Typically you open 2 or 3 histograms. You take a very bright area, then perhaps the most darkest part. You open here a histogram for this one here, and then the same thing you would do then for the other block part. In my case everything is similar, but let's assume this is different. Then I would say, okay, here this is more the brighter area here, so I will take this histogram here to show me, and then I would here take perhaps a more darker area. Well, I don't have so much dark, but let's then take this green vegetation and say this would then be more and more darker part. And then you have one histogram that represents a more darker image and one histogram that represents a more brighter image for the one block, and then you have the same thing for your other block. And then you want to bring these images closer to each other, and therefore we choose, let's say for example, in my case here, the left side is my not so perfect flight day and the right side is my perfect. So because then I have already my selection, so then I would select these images that are not perfect, all of them. And then we can here say we want in general to make all these selected images to at least now to use the full range of dynamic that they have. And this is what we do here. So we use to make a correction and in our case here a gradation correction, we stretch and shift the histogram to use the full dynamic range that still was not used here. So I leave these two histograms here open, and then I can say try to extend it to the full potential. So I leave it here to 100, and then I run the auto adjustment, and now it will only use these yellow selected images and try all the histograms of them to compare and see where can I here squeeze out the most. And then we say run, auto adjust, and in our case nothing will happen, or almost nothing, because we are already here reaching the minimum in the black. And I'm sure we also have a couple images that are here in the bright almost. I want to still show you when you don't have it, how you can do it. So I will now allow to cut off in the bright face here. I will take 5% just to let we see a difference. And then I allow now to cut 5% of my histograms to enhance all of these images into the bright area. So I hit run adjust, and now we see how they become now brighter, the images. Of course, I lost now 5% content, which is not acceptable. Yeah? Just want to show that they are compared to each other and all of them homogeneously wise corrected so that they still look between each other similar. Yeah? So let's here, and this is the nice thing, we have here a histogram, so I can here jump back to my previous step. And as long as you don't hit here OK, then you can jump between your history back and forth. But when you apply it and you leave here, then these ones are then overwritten. But not the orthophotos itself. This is also something perhaps to mention. There is a file besides my orthophotos, which is this RDX file, and this one is overwritten. So you could always then reset it and start from the beginning where your orthophotos came from. In general, there's a 0.5% where most people accept. Some people go up to 0.8, but normally 0.3 would be really more the common sense value that people accept. But let's take 0.5, and then we see here a slight change now was available. I will do it also the same thing on the dark side, and run here also correction, and then we have here now our images corrected in itself. So that means we tried now to maximize the dynamic range of our worst case block. And now we want to make these images come closer to our perfect one. So that means we want now to bring these images to our second block in a radiometric way as close as possible. And this is where we are using the pixel picker. So there is now a tool. I close here the histogram, and you will find here a tool called color picker, and it would be great to have two screens. I have two screens, but I record only one, so I will show you this only here on this other one. I moved this Radiometrix on my second screen, so but I will bring it back, and then I will put my color picker for my left block on the left side. Normally you would just make on your second screen. And I pick here now, let's open here 3 color pickers, 1, 2, and 3, just let you get the idea. And we will now pick here, normally 1 or 2 are enough. Because in my case I'm in Europe, I have a lot of green and I have a lot of open terrain. So I will pick with one color picker a very typical green area where my first block is representing the same green content as in my second block. Okay, so let's perhaps here try to show this by selecting here something along the road. That's perhaps the easiest way, because there we have here this green part. So I will now, okay, I need here, I will now zoom, and to zoom I have to switch here to zoom, and now I will zoom into this area here. So let's zoom in here, and after zooming in here, I hope he will zoom in. I was in the color picker. Okay, let's now zoom one more time. here. Okay, I got it. Okay, let's first zoom in. Okay, and after zooming in, we will then use the color picker. Wait till it loads. Here we go. And I can now see that I have here this green here, which is similar like this green. And therefore, I will now select here this green area here and this green area here, and then compare the information. So let's do this. I can now again go into select. I will move this on the second screen. I will now open color picker and the second color picker, but this time I put it on the right side. And this is now this one is blue. I think that's so. Therefore, I start on the right side. I will select here this part, yeah, and then it will fill up here my RGB value. I take not a point. I take an area, because then it's easier to say, okay, this is in general this green that I want to compare, and then I go here, pick, and then I pick here also this area. In this case, I choose here. Let me try it one more time here. Yeah, here we go. And then we have here this green area here. And we see now that these values are very similar already. Yeah, because I don't have a big difference in mind. But let's say there would be a difference. Then we would now check here. You can also take a second green. I can say, okay, for this one, I take perhaps this more, this tree green, perhaps, for example. Then, of course, you need to find similar trees. Or let's take here this more reddish part. Well, not easy to find something. Or let's take the road first. Okay, I can also take this. So then I take here this road content. And then I pick over here also a road content, which is then this part here. And then we can now see the values, how strong red to red is 1 pixel difference, green to green is about 6 pixels, blue to blue is about 8 pixels. And they should be similar because they are representing the same content. And this green here has 110 to 110, 113 to 126, 89 to 93. And we see there is a similarity already existing here. So, and they also are in the same range. So let's say the difference would always be 20. So this is 110 and this here is 90. This is 113 and this is 93. This is 89 and this is 69. So then in general they are similar, but this one is more darker. And this is more what happens then on your side when you have 2 flying sessions. And this is exactly where we want now to make our correction. And there's again coming the Radiometrix. And then we go here now into the manual correction. So again, we will correct our bad data set, which is the yellow selected one on the left side. Let's say they would all be 20 pixels or histogram values higher. Then that means I want to depress these images. And generally we always take only the midtones. That means we would then grab here, and then you can see the values when I grab this down here. And we see now that these values dropped. And that means if I right click the red one, so it's 110, and I want to get this red then to 90 because this is my assumption here. I would have here also a 90 value for red. Then we try to bring this down towards the 90. In general, we say don't make it perfectly the same value, so I would just leave it perhaps 5 or 10 lower, but into tendency give the data the option to reduce this part. And then we again compare green with green and blue with blue, and then we see, okay, this makes now sense or doesn't make sense. And that's how we try now to make the one block similar like the second block. And typically you do this in different greens and different reds. If you have water, then of course in different blues. Whatever is your main content of your project. So if it's a lot of forest, then of course you want that the green tones are very similar. And therefore picking the correct samples is not easy. Yeah? So this is what you need for each color picker to find a good selection that represents this block similar like the other block. And very often what is easy is open grass field, or if you have always the same type of tree, if it's always the same tree type, then they have also very similar colorization in it. Or if you have a street, of course, streets are very helpful because they are paved in a very similar material always for a longer distance. So that's how you can then compare this and then correct by numerical values. And this is important because every screen looks different. So that means if you would take the same data on 2 different computers in your office and then a third laptop, and you would take the same exact image and you would look at it, it would look in the one screen more colorful, in the other one too greenish, in the third one it would look again different. If you don't have a calibrated screen, then the temperature of how you defined your screen and also the construction of the screen will mislead you in this part, and therefore try really to work with the color picker for the correction. And again, just let's cancel. I will here not save anything here. Don't forget, use at the beginning the histograms to choose which data set has more dynamic range. So that means, let me here just go one time more out, and let me here zoom to extend, and then really right click in your flight from the first day and check how in a bright and a dark image, how much dynamic range have you used in this one and how much dynamic range you have used in the other one. Because if one has a very good dynamic range already, first of all, this is the better data, but secondly, you cannot do much correction anymore. So typically the worst flight day, like for example, that would be, for example, my case here, I have here a little bit more range on dark and bright, and therefore there is still some options possible for me to make a correction here towards the other data set. Okay, so after you used, in this case here, the Radiometrix correction, and you applied them, you say okay, and then you apply these corrections. Perhaps 2 more general hints. Don't make corrections on single photos at the beginning. Always work only on the complete block, and don't try to make it perfect. Just bring the one block closer to the second block. This is a very good first thumb rule. So always only work on data chunks. Don't work on a single photo, because when you start to edit one single photo and make here corrections, then this can mess up the whole block in itself. So therefore, this is really something I would strongly recommend. And lastly, let's go again one more time to the Radiometrix tool. There's also the last 4 tabs, and I show you how they are working. It's just that you have an idea. Let me again select here first my first 2 strips, and then we go into the one of the first 4 tabs, which is intensity contrast. And here we have a graphical representation of our photos. That means the yellow selected ones are our selected ones itself. And I will now on purpose do it wrong. Let's assume these dots would not look like this, but they would look like this here. So you have here, you selected your first flight from day 1, and all these images that you select are also in a position-wise totally somewhere different than the first one. Then this is a good thing, because then this tool can make really a simple way to help you. You would then select them, like now. Well, I cheated now, I already moved them here, but then I can say, I want to move this chunk of images closer to the other block. And and I want to keep the ratio of these photos to each other in the same way. I will show you how it's other way, but that's when you keep this slider on the left side. Then this constellation of selection, when I will modify, will stay as it is. It will only move this green dot when I click now, and I have to be here in the modify mode, and I move this green dot into my new position. Let's make it first here a little bit brighter than the other ones, just that you see it moves completely all the images in the same constellation and to this position. And if I go back and I move now the slider here to this part and I click here, then all these yellow dots will end up in this green one here, so they will all become a single one. That means we also change now the we make darker images brighter, brighter images less darker, so not something that you want, but it's like a contrast enhancement. That means you can say instead of 0% and you want to move them here and make a slight contrast correction, then you move the slider a little bit up, let's say 15%, and then I move them here. And then these images stay in its constellation and still get a little contrast correction. So this is a very nice tool that helps you when you see in a graphical way here that this is really a clear bunch of two different data sets, and still they are in itself correct. If of course one image here would be totally wrong, let's perhaps take this one here, let's unselect all, let's just select this one here, you can also select inside here, and this image here, let's make it completely wrong, is totally overburned. Then of course now, when you now select this part and you make a relative correction, it will stay in its relation. I mean, it makes sense, but just to be sure that you don't make it wrong, so modifying now, moving this here, will totally burn this one out. So nothing that we want to do in our case. So let me bring them back. So this is the first tool. I think from all the four, the most powerful one. Don't forget, if you want to work with the gradation corrections, the automatic and manual curves, which is very common, so this is more the common case how is worked today, then please first make them and then afterwards look here if you can make this correction. So we always say work from left to right here, so don't start here and then go back to the other four tabs on the left side. Very important. I hope you were listening up to minute 27 and you don't forget this here. Then the other one here is saturation. I think a very dangerous tool, but here I go to zoom. I zoom into this area here inside. Let's select all. And we can in general make the images more grayed out. This is by moving all the bunch of photos more to the lower part. So let's modify them here. And let's move them a little bit together. And if I now move this green dot back here, then the images become more grayed out. If I move it up this red line, then they become stronger saturated. So let's go one back and let's move it one more time. So let's make it extreme. So twice the distance from here, and then they become oversaturated, of course. So nothing that I'm very careful with saturation. The only thing I would really do is only desaturate. So that means bringing the images a little bit more down to that they are looking more washed out, which is good not only because this looks then more homogeneous in the mosaic afterwards. But in my case, I don't need it here. And then we have the third one, which is now really color correction. This is where you have perhaps one individual color which is wrong, and you could see it also here. That means here, if let's say some images would have a strong green touch. Let me here show it, for example. I select perhaps here these last. Let's take the whole last strip. And I will here modify it and just move it a little bit into the greenish part. So let's move them here a little bit here. So here. And when we now take a look, then you can see it on your screen also a little bit, because you see that the same content, like for example this field or these vegetations, they have here a difference in it. And it's still the same flying day. Yeah? So it's not 2 different flying days. It's the same flight day and still difference in color. This would be for me a clear indication of wrong color. And then here, this would be a tool that could help you in some sort of way to correct this, because then you would see it here that they tend to be in the green or blue or red zone stronger than all the other ones. But very dangerous. I would be careful. Also very important is, you see that if I select all, the center point is not where we are, which is clear because I'm in Europe. My main part of my image is green and yellow. Green from the vegetation, yellow from the open terrain where we have our field work. So it does not help to modify and to move this green dot to the red one, just to make it perfectly centered in our color distribution, because then we make everything a little bit bluish and a little bit reddish, which is really not what we want. And the last one is really, we have only integrated it because of rooftops. That means if you have rooftops in your orthophotos and they should be red, but they look pink because there was a mistake in your exposure from your image, then you can here individually correct a single color, and then you could make your pink or magenta looking rooftops more red. So then you move them and say everything that is magenta becomes more reddish, and then you could correct them here. So this is then the last tool. Okay, after doing the corrections, again you say okay, and then the RDX files which are located to my photos are overwritten, and now you can continue in the other video where after loading the orthos, this is where I now use this video which continued now. The next part is now called a mosaic tile definition. So in the video this would be between minute 14:33 and 14:40. So this is where this video belongs to, and then you can continue to run all the other things that in the other video are explained. I hope this helps. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.